Again. Hello, everyone. Hope all of you guys are doing well. I am doing well, just so you know, and today we're here with Sally, and I cannot wait to know all about her and her work, her projects, how she got to where she is today. Yeah, and it's really interesting because this is for me, this is early because I don't wake up this early, in the morning, although it's like afternoon, like a few minutes into the afternoon now, but still. So yeah, I was just so excited. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna wake up early and do this. So how are you doing, Sally? And can you please give a brief introduction to
Sure. Well, thank you. It's such a joy to be here with you, Raheen. Thank you so much for being in touch. It's the other end of the day for me. So it's sort of late afternoon here. So I've just had my day. So we're kind of on this opposite thing, but that's what I love about this world that we live in now. It's pretty amazing that we can connect globally all over the place in different time and space to, where we're limited to physically. So yeah, amazing to be here and have this conversation with you. Wherever it leads and wherever it goes, I'm up for, the direction that you want to take us in.
Yeah.
What
I mean,
you want to hear about me? You want to hear just a general introduction?
yeah, like a general introduction to sort of get started with.
Okay, well, lovely to be here, and hi to anybody and everybody out there watching. Let me just give you in a little nutshell who I am, what I do. My name's Sally and I live in Australia, the northern part of Australia in Queensland. Most recently, and how I've been introduced to Raheen is through the work that I do with young people. I've recently published a book called Figuring Out Your Future, which is predominantly written for young people aged between about 15 and 25 who are unsure of their path, feeling just confused about what to do next once they leave school. The world looks completely different to how it did even 5 or 10 years ago. And so the traditional kind of trajectory that we may have followed in has very much changed. There are lots of things that have opened up. There's a huge amount of uncertainty facing young people now. And I really don't think that our current traditional education system is equipping the young people as they step out into the world. They're not equipping them with the tools and the know-how of how to navigate through that uncertainty. So that's where my book really came from, was seeing this huge need in young people, which, has of course contributed to part of the problem with all the mental health and all the issues that seem to have exploded in the last 2 or 3 years. In the mental health arena, that when you look back, it's easy always to look back and join the dots. It's not so easy to look forwards and do the same thing. But when we look back and we see the gaps that exist in the current education system that we have, this is a big one of how do you step out into the world? How are you supposed to know what you want to do? How do you become who you're here to be when there is so much expectation of what you're meant to do or what your life is supposed to look like, from either parents or teachers or society or our own self-expectation. And so my book really addresses that, and I have programs alongside that to work with that. I also love to help kids and young people learn to really express themselves, whether that's through their voice and learning to speak up, or whether it's through what they choose to do in their life. So it's everything sort of weaves in together in my programs.
Yeah, I think it's really important, Sally, what you're doing, because I'm 15, and sometimes, people of my age group think that I am the weird one out because I know what I'm going to do. So it's like, and I've known this, like, I know exactly what I want to do very specifically, the programs I want to study, my path. Again, life would never go as I would plan it. plan for it too. So I'm never going to be like, okay, so this is my plan, and then I have to achieve this, and I have to. Again, I do have clarity on, okay, so if everything goes according to plan, this is where I see myself in 5 years. But if it doesn't, it's all right, because I think I've had enough experiences in life that weren't planned at all, were not, like, I did not see them coming, that I just don't think too much about it. But I have so many friends that are just figuring it out, and it's not that, okay, if you don't have it figured out that you feel weird. It's sometimes you feel weird that you do have it figured out. It's like,
Yeah.
out, you do not have parents that have put in a lot of pressure, or you do know what you're going to do, you do have a sense of direction, and that just right now separates you from a lot of people. So I think it's very interesting, because definitely the mental health crisis that we have been facing has been booming since after COVID, because I think COVID was the tipping point, so to say, for so many different things. But mental health was one of them, because just staying inside a lot made us think a lot. And then if we do not, and I think most of the young people do not process their feelings. They either try to smush them down, or try to numb them, or do anything but to feel them. And at some point in time, it definitely comes out in a bad way that you don't want for them to come out. But let's start from the beginning. So I asked this to all my guests that I have on here on the podcast. How was a 15-year-old Sally like? Because I'm 15 right now, so I'm like always curious of how you were when you were my age. So what are we looking at, 15-year-old Sally perspective?
Okay, well, go back in time about 40 years or so. Now I'm in my ripe old age of mid 50s. I feel like I'm only just getting started, by the way. So let me also just say, yes, you are definitely in the minority with being very clear about what you want to do. And that can be a scary place too. The stats are showing us that between 1% and 3% of young people really know what they want to do in their life and end up pursuing that path. The rest of us, the other 97%, don't know. And so sometimes it's much more difficult to be in the minority.
Mm-hmm.
Than it is to be in the majority. But in this case, we're not really catering to actually either group. The education realms, the traditional education I'm always talking about with this, not so much sort of innovative education, because there are definitely some great places and people and programs out there doing some fabulous things in this arena. But the general population undergoing traditional education is really left out to dry when they leave school. They're just about ticking the academic boxes, and that's it. There's not really a lot of energy put into developing people who are going to be fulfilled and capable and contributing grown-ups in the world. So zip back in time to my 15-year-old person, and I was shut down very quickly. I wanted to be a prison counselor when I was 15. I wanted to go into prisons and change the world by counseling hardcore criminals to help them transform themselves. My mum at the time was a school teacher. My dad was an engineer, and they wanted a much more traditional sort of pathway for me. They thought this was a crazy job, and they basically said, that's ridiculous. You're going to be exhausted, burnt out, mentally drained. I think you should look for something else. So I still was interested. I went down the pathway of psychology. I applied to uni for degrees in psychology and philosophy. I got accepted into a couple of different universities. I was always a very nerdy child in terms of I was super curious about how things worked, why things didn't work, all of those things. I was the person that was asking why and how, and annoyingly to my parents, I'm sure, looking back. But I really didn't have a clear idea. Once that sort of prison counselor label got sort of shut down, I had lots of people tell me it was a crazy idea. And so I just thought, oh, I'll keep my options open and I'll study a very generic subject of psychology, because I was very interested in how people tick, what motivates people to do what they do. And so I thought psychology at the time would address that interest that I had. I ended up getting very sidetracked. I took a year off. In those days, having a gap year was not even called a gap year. You know, I took this year off and I traveled. I was brought up in the UK, and I decided to go to Australia and have a look around and have an adventure, which I did. I ended up staying in Australia and pursued a very different avenue, in that I ended up doing a sports science, or applied and did half of a sports science degree, with the idea of then getting into doing physiotherapy. So I was going to do the sports science and then transfer and do physiotherapy. I got very sidetracked along the way, got married very young at the age of 21, dropped out of uni after deferring, and never went back and finished that off, and got stuck working in that health care, exercise physiology sort of industry, and then took a different trajectory, jumped into management and marketing, which I loved because it was working with psychology in a different way in terms of sales. So I have a very unorthodox path, how I've kind of ended up getting into what I've got into. And one thing has just really led to another. When I look back and I join the dots of my own life, at the time, it looked like I was all over the place, and I was doing all these different things. And I've had about 4 different careers. I've worked for the airlines as a long-haul flight attendant, flying internationally. I've worked in the gym industry. I've run my own businesses doing various different things. And so it sort of looks like I've just been jitting from one thing to another. But when I look back, there is a thread that runs through all these things that now has led me to where I am now. And I think that the biggest thread was always doing something that brought me joy.
Yeah.
When I really honored myself and I really paid attention to what I loved doing, I ended up doing really well at it. I ended up, of course, enjoying it. And it became something that helped me lead on to the next thing. When I did things that didn't bring me joy, I would either get really sick, I would become quite depressed. So, you know, the feedback that I think life gives us is often quite obvious, in terms of, are we really honoring ourselves? And that's something that's, you know, part of the adventure. It's part of the unfolding of life that you don't always know when you're 15 or 16 what that's going to be. And I love to say to young people when I'm running a program or something, I have people go through a visualization exercise, and I get them into a space where they can imagine their life laid out in front of them, and they know exactly what's going to take place. I mean, if I say that to you now, and you talked about planning before, and I love that you touched on that, Raheem, because I think that a life without a plan is a little bit loose, and it doesn't feel as good as if you've got some kind of plan. But if you're rigidly stuck in your plan, you're also limiting yourself. You're not allowing life to work with you, and you can really limit where you end up going. So I talk about, in my book, I talk about the type of planning. How do you create goals that stay flexible and loose enough that allow life to work with you and allow the magic of life to happen? Because life is an extraordinary adventure. Extraordinary. Yeah. And the adventure is just as much within to discover who you are as a person as it is out there in the wide world. And so finding the balance between the adventure within and the adventure without is the tools that I teach, so that you can experience really life to the full, and, you know, and squeeze every drop out of life.
Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so there's a lot of things that I got from what you said, starting off from, like, you know, since I was very young, I started out as a stand-up comedian. Like I started, and today's actually my work anniversary. So today marked
Congratulations.
exactly 4 years of the first time that I ever worked professionally. Like I went out and I performed stand-up comedy, which is very interesting for an 11-year-old to do. But I
Yes,
did it.
totally.
And it's been one thing led to another. And I think, again, if I look back at it, I'd be able to connect dots like, oh, it all makes sense. It was all there. But I think it's the journey, it's the opportunity, it's the experiences, it's the realizations that all get you to the point that wherever you are right now in life, there's always something that got you there. So that, and then I think in my early years of just starting to work, most people were like, you have a lot on your plate and you should just focus on one thing. For me, that was almost impossible to do, because if I had not explored that much, I would never have come across what I want to do right now. I would never have come across my love for networking with people, or talking to people, or collaboration, or co-creation, or all these so many things that I just love. So I think for me, that time, it was very important to explore. But I recently just started mentoring a young girl, and I tell her the same thing, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm being the adult here or something, because I was like, you need to focus, because she's doing everything all over the place, but you need to start slowly but surely, getting to a point where you're focused on this one goal. And even if you're doing a bazillion things to get to that goal, you need to get to that one goal. And once you've gotten there, you can do whatever you want. But I just want you to be focused on that one goal. That, and third, and more importantly, I got a little carried away when you were saying the last things, because what you're saying aligns so perfectly with what we're reading nowadays in class. So I go to the Socratic Experience, and it's a very unique school. We basically learn through Socratic dialogue, which is very interesting. And I think maybe one day you should shadow. I think you'd really, really enjoy class. But just dropping in one day. So we're reading the Renaissance, basically explaining how some people are just have Renaissance souls. And I think, because I think of myself as one, I think you are one too, because there's a bunch of characteristics, and I do have the PDF, and if you want, I can send that over for you to take a look. So there's a bunch of different activities to see your interests, to see your passions, to kind of figure out your goal by the end of the book. So it's like very interesting to read and go through it. And because my humanities class is focused on the Renaissance, so we wanted to do something Renaissance related, but something that is relevant to sophomores. So we kind of got together on this book, which was really, really interesting. But I mean, you wrote this book, and you're seeing so many of these things, and you also shared this statistics, and definitely I see that I am one of very, very few people that do know what they're going to do. So how much do you think, your parents play into it? Because even in your story, maybe you could have become a prison counselor if your parents, would have been like, yes, Sally, you should go and, talk to people that are, some perhaps rehabilitated, former offenders, perhaps they are, just hardcore criminals. You talk to them. And I think for every parent, it's hard for, them to just go like, you know what, I'm going to let my daughter go and do that, because it's just hard to, allow yourself to allow them to do it. But how much role do you think your parents, or anyone's parents, play in the journey of finding what you want to do in your life? Because at the end of the day, no matter how much you say you don't care, you do want to make them proud, for sure.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think that from the children that I speak to the older young people, in their sort of mid-20s, there is still such a tie to their parents. There's definitely a feeling that you want to please your parents. They've raised you, and in most cases, there's definitely a feeling of some kind of almost a giving back. I wouldn't say it's as strong as an obligation, but it's a very strong motivation in determining your pathway. And a lot of times that, well, most times it comes from very well-meaning parents that only want the best for their kids. It's never about creating conflict and upsetting your child. It's always that the parents just feel like they want the best thing for their child. So it comes from a really beautiful place, but it can create a lot of angst and anxiety and pressure for the student. And that's the experience that I've found over the years in talking to a whole variety of kids in international schools and here in Australia, that they do feel pressure to go down a certain path because it's acceptable in their parents' eyes or in society's eyes. And it's not necessarily what they want to do. And then down the track, there are obviously consequences for that because they're not really doing what they love. They're not honoring themselves. So there's going to be some kind of conflict within themselves that comes down the track. I do think that the age that we live in now, parents are probably a little more enlightened, and that they understand that, you know, having their child do something that's really fulfilling and satisfying is super important, rather than just going down the track of being, you know, a career such as, and typically it's, you know, accounting, lawyer, doctor, architect. It's those kind of academic type careers, or at least going to university and having some kind of formal qualification, tends to make the parents feel more comfortable and tends to make them feel like, well, there's going to be good job opportunities and some kind of, you know, financial security.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine if, you know, you come home and you say, oh, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. That's my job. You know, a lot of parents would freak out going, well, how are you going to support yourself?
Yeah.
Are you going to have enough work? I think that's a really fun hobby. Go do that on your side, you know, in your spare time, and get your fulfillment from doing it as a hobby. But go and get a proper job. You know, there's a lot of that goes on, that kids that have these passions aren't taken seriously. And I just fast forward to the world of adults, and this is before I worked with young people. I was working, I had a consulting business called Rethink Health, which came out of 20 years of my own health issues that I had. I had debilitating migraines and severe food intolerance, and I was really unwell. And it took me 20 years to really overcome that and to find out what was at the root of all of that, which has led me on this really amazing, interesting path that I've been on to sort of uncover the metaphysical side of health. So my consulting business was about connecting our emotional, psychological health with our physiological symptoms of health and disease. It was a very fascinating world to live in and to work in. But I found myself surrounded by, you know, 40, 50, 60-year-old people at the very broken end of life. And one day in the midst of consulting, I thought to myself, and these tools that I developed over time to help people transform their lives were amazing. I was having some really great results and people loved the work that we did together. But I had this little thought, why do we wait until we're at the broken end of life to start doing this, to start asking ourselves these questions? Because that's really the basis of my tools, is asking yourself the right questions.
Yeah.
And when I look at people who are pursuing successful, fulfilling, wonderful lives, as opposed to people who are frustrated and still searching for their own fulfillment and their own sort of version of success, however you define that, the difference what came from the questions that those people had asked themselves. And I thought, why are we not asking teenagers these questions? I wonder if we can. I wonder if anyone is. And that's how my programs have evolved, from collaborating with young people out of the questions that they're asking. And so, you know, the world that I live in and breathe in and work in has no rules. It has no right or wrong. You know, it understands that judgment, when we bring judgment into it, we are, to me, really, if I had to tell you how do I define love? It's the absence of judgment.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so the world that we live in, of course, is full of judgment, because that's how we exist. But the judgment on what's good or bad or right or wrong is all about perspective. And let me explain that a little bit better, that if I say to you, oh, this terrible thing happened to me, and, you know, it was this and this and this, I could look back in 5 years' time and say, actually, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, and it's all perspective. Your perspective of what might be really good and great, I might think is terrible. You know, somebody that absolutely loves fast downhill skiing and thinks it's the best thing ever is terrifying to me. That's the last thing I want to do. And so, you know, when we really start breaking it down, there is no right or wrong. And so that's what's really hard, when a child feels like their parents is telling them, this is what you need to do. This is the best thing. This is what's right for you. This is the right path. Having been in this world now for such a long time, in looking at how, you know, how the future unfolds, there really is no right or wrong path. Whatever path you're on is the right path for you in that moment. It doesn't mean that you have to stay on it. But to me, there's no losers if you learn from something. And so if the feedback in life is uncomfortable for you, it's an opportunity for you to learn that maybe there's a different way. And so I've written this book called Figuring Out Your Future. To me, it's much more about not figuring it out and allowing life to take you on an adventure, and not having to have all the answers, and not having to be right, and learning how you navigate in that inherent uncertainty that is life. Because let's face it, none of us know the future. I think COVID showed us that more than anything, that so many of us had our future plans and goals, and this idea of how we thought our life was going to unfold. And then nobody could have predicted what was going to happen with COVID coming in. And it's been such a great reality check for so many of us to go deep inside and have this reflective time and reassess what's really going on in life. You know, there's been so much to come out of it that I don't know that we would have had so quickly. I think it's accelerated it's accelerated the trajectory that humanity was on, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it has, because I think it was our time to just think about life, because we were going so, I know about myself, I was going so fast, and there's so many things that I'm doing. And I remember I had just gotten back from my theater tour. And right the next day I see on the news, it's like schools are closing, schools are closed. And I used to live in a gated community, and that gate got closed. No coming in, no going out. Oh my God, my life's gonna end. And this is not fun. And well, it didn't end, and COVID was the best thing that could have happened to me, because it gave me so many I started interviewing in COVID. I started talking to people. I remember on the peak time of COVID in Pakistan, I used to interview like 5 to 6 people on average a day. I should book that many interviews. Some of them showed up, some didn't show up. And the whole day I was just talking to people. I was watching TV. I was having fun. I was just dancing around the house. Like it was that time. But I think after COVID, I think I saw the bigger picture. There's so many things that changed. COVID changed education, because that was our wake up call. Like, guys, wake up. We need to change this. This is not working out. And that was our time to think about it. There's so many educators that have quit after COVID. There's so many educators that have started their own thing after COVID, because they felt the need for it to be there. So I see that it has done a lot for us. But coming to your book, I really would want to get a copy of it for one of my friends. Because I think for her it's going to be like really helpful, and I just want this to be my sweet gesture to her, because she's always talking about what should I do with my life, and I'm like, anything, man. I would love you the same even if you were doing nothing with your life. So I would definitely want to get my hands on a copy. But how can we get a copy? How can we contact you? And how can parents make sure that their kid is not feeling pressurized and is loved? Because ultimately every parent just wants the best for their child. They just want mental and financial stability and their happiness too.
Yeah, yep. Great question. I'll give you my links in a moment for getting a hold of me, but you can literally just Google Sally Lewis, or you can Google Figuring Out Your Future and find me on my website or Amazon and all the usual things. And I will make sure you get a copy of my book for you, and you can pass it around to friends or pass it on. On my website also, which is just sallylewis.com, there is a little exercise where I explain how to, it's called a connection exercise. And it's basically, how do you communicate, how parents and children can communicate when they're in two different sides, here, one's over here and thinking very strongly this way, one's over here. And how do you come together and find the common ground? So the connection exercise is ask some really different questions to help try and bring people together. So that's one really practical little tool that parents and students can go to on the website, just sallylewis.com, and scroll down. I think it's even on the homepage, connection exercise, and there's a little video that explains it on there. I actually think it starts with digging in and allowing each person to self-explore. Self-exploration and self-discovery. The more that parents encourage their kids to do that, and the more that kids do it. And actually, for parents, I've had so many parents read my book and say, oh my goodness, this is not just for my child, this has been really helpful for me. I've had retirees read it who've said, oh, they're at that crossroads in their life of, they've worked for 40 years and now retirement stretches out and they don't know how to fill their days. There's a quote at the beginning of my book that talks about, all that remains is how do we fill our time? Really, when it boils down to it, it's what are you going to get up and do every day of your life? And how are you going to fill your time to be the most rewarding for you, the most contributing to society, if that's something that is important to you, the most value to yourself in terms of being paid well for what you love doing? I think that there are definitely two pieces to this question that you touched on. How do you end up doing what you love doing, but how do you get paid for it? Mm-hmm. And I've had parents say to me, it's all very well to encourage my child to follow their heart and pursue their dreams and do what fills up their cup, but how are they going to get paid to do that? And that is a very interesting question to explore, and I dig deep into that when I do one-on-one consults with people and small group exercises. We go on a little journey together where we explore exactly that, and it's quite phenomenal sometimes the things that come out of that once you have a bit of a brainstorm in that specific department. Connecting with what you love doing is about allowing yourself to be on the journey and the adventure, just like your 11-year-old self jumping in as a stand-up comedian, and that might not be what you're going to do forever, and it might not be the only thing you do. And I actually have two very distinct hats in my life. I have one where I call playing houses, and I love creating beautiful spaces. Mm-hmm. So, I married an architect, and he does all these great designs, and I get to do all the interiors and design and develop and do it. So that's kind of like my fun job that I do. And then my other hat I wear is my mentoring with young people and the work that I do, the programs, the work that I do with them, which is incredibly fulfilling and inspiring and stimulating for me. So I have this beautiful balance. I don't feel like I have to focus on one or another. And I love going back to your conversation before with the young person that you're mentoring. You're like, focus on one thing. If you want to juggle and do lots of things and that's working for you, great. The other thing that I often say to parents is to allow their child to pursue their dreams whilst they're doing some other job. You know, with young people, you might not step straight out of school at the age of 18 and jump into your dream job. Your first job is probably not going to be your dream job.
Yeah, for sure. That I'm so sorry. I know I'm kind of cutting you off over here because we have 2 minutes on the clock before the meeting ends. So yeah, it's just I do not have the pro Zoom, and that's sort of the problem. And I know it's been such a great conversation with you, and definitely I would love to get the book, and I think that would be really helpful. Thank you so much, Sally, for being here, for taking out the time. And I'm so glad that we did this because I think this was really interesting, and I really have to watch this back and get some notes, and probably some of them would be really useful in class too. So yeah, thank you so much. And I'm going to end the interview. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Definitely, I will also be leaving the links for Sally in the description, so you can go and you can connect with her, talk to her, and check out her amazing work. So thank you.
Thank you, Raheen. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.